Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Reich, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and to our monthly webinar series, Climate Conversations, Pathways to Action. The National Academies provide independent, objective advice to inform policy with evidence, spark progress and innovation, and confront challenging issues for the benefit of society. In keeping with this mission, we're excited to host these conversations about issues relevant to policy action on climate change. I'd like to acknowledge that the National Academy's Washington, D.C. headquarters is physically housed on the traditional land of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have been its stewards throughout the generations. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land, and acknowledge that the expertise held by different Native communities is crucial to the work of understanding and addressing climate change. Today, we're going to talk about how to prepare for the consequences of abrupt changes in human and natural systems, and how to encourage positive social tipping points. Our conversation will be recorded and available to view right here, right after the event. If you'd like to ask questions, please submit them in the box below the video at any time, and we'll incorporate them in a dedicated question and answer period in the final half hour. We also encourage you to participate in the polls that will appear in that same location, and to give your feedback after the event in the survey linked above the video. Above, you'll also see a link to sign up for our weekly newsletter about all the upcoming climate activities at the academies, and information about our April 27th climate conversation, which is about how to better use nature-based solutions to build climate resilience and support human well-being and ecosystems. We've also listed a few National Academies reports and workshops relevant to tipping points, which I encourage you to look at for greater depth. For our conversation today, I'm grateful to be joined by Laurie Gehring, a journalist who's written on climate change for more than 2 decades and who serves as the climate change editor for Context, the daily news website from Thomson Reuters Foundation. Laurie is going to introduce our conversationalists and moderate today's event. Thank you again for joining us for Climate Conversations. Laurie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex. With continued climate change, elements of the Earth system may reach tipping points of abrupt dramatic change with irreversible consequences, like the rapid collapse of ice sheets or dieback of the Amazon rainforest. Tipping points also exist in human systems. Devastation from extreme weather and major stresses on food, energy, and water could accumulate and tilt society into radically new dynamics, such as mass migration or major economic shifts. However, tipping points in human systems can also be positive and stem from rapidly spreading norms, behaviors, and technologies, such as how battery storage could tip the power sector irreversibly toward renewable energy. Today, we're going to talk about tipping points we're approaching, how to prepare for those we might reach, and how to encourage positive social tipping points for action on climate change. I'm glad to be joined by 2 people who know about tipping points, both in the Earth system, but crucially also in the human systems. Alona M. Otto holds the Professorship of Societal Impacts of Climate Change at the Wegener Center for Climate and Global Change at the University of Graz, Austria. She leads a research group that analyzes the social dynamic processes and interventions that are likely to spark the rapid social changes necessary to radically transform the interactions of human societies with nature and with ecosystems in the next 30 years. We also have Rachael Shwom. She's a professor in the Department of Human Ecology at Rutgers University and acting director of the Rutgers Energy Institute. She conducts research that links sociology, psychology, engineering, economics, and public policy to investigate how social and political factors influence society's responses to energy and climate problems. So I wanted to just start with maybe, Rachael, we can start with you. Can you just tell me a little bit about your background and what brought you to this topic?
Sure. So I'm a sociologist. I'm coming to you from the New Jersey coast, where we are actually experiencing sea level rise at a higher rate than other places due to subsidence and sea level rise. And I'm in a raised home, so I'm dealing with this personally, but also I'm a sociologist who studies how we make sense of climate change in our social and political responses. And I came to this particular topic of social tipping points when my colleague Dr. Bob Kopp, who studies biogeophysical climate tipping points and is an expert on sea level rise, was doing a review of all these different tipping points. And he said to me, well, I'm realizing the decision-making relevant tipping points in the climate social system are actually things that might happen in 5 to 10 years or in the next few decades. And these are all things on about rapid social change more than these climate tipping points that we're often talking about. And he said, what do you think about that? What are some of the things you think about? And so I embarked on this exploration of thinking about kind of rapid social change and when that happens versus very gradual social change, and really trying to think about what a social tipping point is, how it happens, and how we might start to find them and either prevent negative ones from happening or push forward positive ones.
Thanks, Rachel. And Alona, how did you come to this topic?
Well, I spent over 10 years in a climate research institute at the Potsdam for Climate Impact Research. And at the beginning, I did research on climate adaptation. But at some stage, actually, it was a report that we wrote for the World Bank. And the task of the report was to assess impacts of climate change on different systems, but like health, energy, agriculture, and the impact of different levels of global warming. And this is like when we first started to look how bad is 2 degrees warming, how bad is 3 degrees warming, how bad is 4 degrees warming. And interestingly, like when I started to analyze or understand what actually it means, and like a lot was not there. Like for instance, like impact on human health. Like there were not that many quantitative and model results to assess. But this what was there was quite scary, and it was I think 2012, 13, 14. So there were 3 report series, and it kind of made me really scared, and I thought. Yeah, I have to do something, and I started to ask myself, what can we do to prevent those higher degrees of global warming? And maybe the exact moment when I got to the research on social tipping point was in a conversation with actually with Johan Rockström and a few other colleagues when we were talking about, we asked this, or actually he was asking this question. So what are like social tipping points that could be similar to the tipping points in the climate system, but in a way bring this rapid change that is needed? And my answer to this question was, we don't know. And I proposed, let's do research about it. And this is how it started. And I and also my colleagues, we designed expert elicitation process, and we just ask international experts like what they think about this, whether it's possible to keep the warming below 2 degrees, and what are exactly those social tipping point proposals that are likely to bring this rapid social change that is needed. And this is how it started.
Okay. Alona, like we've heard about even in the news in the last weeks about some of the potential Earth system tipping points, things like melting of the Greenland ice sheet, the dieback of the Amazon rainforest. There's been some things about the Atlantic overturning circulation too happening in the news. But what are other of the major tipping points in the Earth system we should be looking at, and how worried should we be about those, and how soon should we be worrying about this?
Well, so yeah, there are several of tipping elements in the Earth climate system. It's difficult to say which one is the most important, because they are all important. So they include, for instance, like the jet stream, or the Amazon rainforest, or the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or the Atlantic thermohaline circulation, West Antarctic ice sheet, and so on and so on. So, but maybe the question could be which ones are at the kind of closest to tipping at lower degrees of global warming. So which are likely to tip in the, like, if we don't rapidly start mitigating climate change, and which are at the likelihood of tipping like in the next actually years. Yeah. So it's first coral reefs or alpine glaciers that actually. So I'm living, working in Austria, and it's really sad to be there and to see the glaciers that are really disappearing like every year and year after year, and there's just less of them. But also Arctic summer sea ice, Greenland, and also Western Antarctic ice sheet. Yeah? So these are the ones that are kind of very close to tipping, even when we are at around 2-3 degrees of global warming. And coral reefs are, some say they are in a way already lost at 1.5 degrees. It's also what we see, that coral reefs are really bleaching, and and that's very of course very worrying many people.
Thanks. And Rachel, what sets these tipping points aside from the sort of more gradual things that we see, rising temperatures and that kind of thing? What makes a tipping point a tipping point?
In these tipping points, what you see is positive feedback, so that as they progress, the more they progress, the faster they move along and the changes become. And so an example of this, for example, is when we talk about changes in the ice cover, and you're getting, so it's warming, right? The atmosphere is warming and you're getting melting. And as that melting comes about, you're getting like white, ice reflects more heat and darker land absorbs more heat. And so as more of the darker land cover becomes uncovered, right, you get more heating of that area. And then as that happens, more ice melts, right? And that kind of feedback that happens. And so those changes speed up as they go. They become more rapid and come up that curve. And then you experience this kind of abrupt change in state. And so with incremental, slow, graduate changes, it kind of gives us time to adapt. We're watching it happen very slowly. And those kinds of changes actually, in our biophysical environment represent their own set of challenges, as they can be kind of hard for us to perceive and actually feel urgency or the need to adapt when something's happening very slowly in front of us. But it also gives us time to make a plan and kind of gradually, change the things we need to be changing. When we are hitting a tipping point in the biogeophysical system, it's, at some point you have just a new set of conditions very quickly. And so you have less time to make the changes you need to your new environment. And if folks in the audience know, we often talk about the story of like a frog that's placed in boiling water and hops out very quickly, right? And it knows it has to get out of the water because it's been placed in, but versus a frog that's been put in kind of warm water that's then slowly, gradually warmed and then just finds itself boiling, right? And so the gradual changes we may experience like that, and climate tipping points, it's a very abrupt change.
Thanks very much, Rachel. So these things are really fundamentally different than, this is something that feeds on itself, that is very hard to turn around and sort of takes on its own life, which is a reason to keep an eye on them. But
one more.
Go ahead, Elena.
Is to note that those changes, they lead the system to like a completely different qualitative state. So maybe like to take an example of the Amazon rainforest. Yeah, it's actually starting already now that the vegetation there is changing to like a kind of dry and steppe-like vegetation. And once you are there, like it's a completely different system. Yeah, it's not anymore like a rainforest, like with a lot of biodiversity and also a lot of moisture that is stored there. It's turning to like kind of like more like a savanna type of vegetation. Yeah, like it is kind of dry and like completely different species of animals and plants are there. Yeah, so I think it's also maybe some illustrative example that shows that it's about like changing actually like basic kind of system characteristic and getting to like a completely different qualitative state of the system.
Okay, thanks. I think what I'd like to do now is move in toward taking a bit of a deeper dive into the kind of implications of tipping points for policy. I'm curious what types of targeted investments or policies could help minimize the risks of these negative societal tipping points or encourage positive ones that we haven't really had a chance to talk about. It'd be great to have some examples of that. Alona, many models of decarbonization have emissions trajectories that assume a fairly orderly shift from activities that release carbon to those that don't over the next 30 years. But how could social tipping points change those trajectories or accelerate them? Could you give us an example?
Well, so many of current mitigation models, they're actually based on kind of linear assumptions and also models or kind of economic models that are based on kind of equilibrium principles. But the basic idea is it's kind of like, you know, like kind of the idea of kind of step-by-step change, yeah, that we kind of add a little bit, you know, things, and then, you know, we will get there. But it's kind of like a more like a linear change, yeah. And we talk about the rate of change that is needed to meet the challenge and avoid higher levels of global warming. We really need those kind of disruptive and rapid changes that are likely to rapidly change our society to also like a different type of equilibrium where our like most of our energy is based on, for example, renewable renewables. Yeah? And some examples there. So for instance, exactly like decentralized energy production is an example of such a disruptive innovation, because like the centralized energy production is mostly requires renewables. Yes, so the idea is that you go away from kind of like fossil fuel based those big centralized system to kind of like more decentralized system that are based on solar, wind, or type of energy that is suitable for certain area. But also process changes in urban areas, yeah, like how we construct our human settlements. That's also very important. How do we, what kind of infrastructure we have, what type of buildings? So for instance, like one of such ideas is to build buildings from biomaterials, yeah, also including wood. So the idea is that you actually store carbon in the buildings as such, yeah. And there are much more of such candidates for such destructive tipping or social tipping.
How about things like carbon pricing, Alona? Is that a possibility?
Well, I think it's very important, and we definitely need carbon pricing, but in my understanding, it's in a way it's a very big type of change. So this idea of social tipping points, or in general of tipping points, it's about kind of like small changes that can produce a big system change effect. And with carbon prices, it's actually like a huge change, and also you need an international system for trading also carbon permits. So it's quite a huge change, but of course it's also needed, yeah. But there are maybe many discussions also among scientists, like can carbon price have such a rapid effects or not? I think at the end we need everything. You know, the challenge is so huge. So I think we should just implement whatever is possible. But to my understanding, I think carbon pricing has kind of like more of this kind of step by step
Okay.
effect. Although I might be wrong, of course.
No, that's interesting. Rachel, now one of the problems is that election and business cycles happen on the order of months or years, while tipping points play out in natural systems over a much longer term, if they happen at all. How do decision makers prepare for the outcomes of tipping points that are low likelihood and uncertain in timing, but that have really high impact?
Yeah, so this is a great question about kind of how social systems deal with uncertainty and risk, and just differential timing between what you're talking about, the election, cycles, and when our decision makers are in power for how long, and how institutions work, versus kind of the timelines of climate change, right? And those impacts. And one approach is building on Iona's idea of small interventions, is to undertake, worst case scenario planning, when, and see if there are things that can be done now at a low cost, that will minimize harm if the worst case does happen. So, for example, if you're a community that has a plot of land you're planning to develop, and from models, kind of the range of flooding that you might have on that piece of land, maybe you make sure not to place your electric generation in that, area that's most likely to flood, right? And just small planning interventions, right, that can do that. Another approach is would folks are, and similarly along the same line, as robust decision making, where we're trying to help identify portfolios of adaptation strategies that work, reasonably well across large ranges of uncertain future climate conditions. And so identifying, things that, whether it's high levels of drought or low levels of drought, you've kind of planned to try to accommodate the biggest range of conditions in the future.
No, that makes a lot of sense, that you've got to, if you're preparing for something you don't understand very well what might happen, you want the widest range of choices available then.
And can I jump back to the point on, do we have time to go back?
Yes, absolutely.
I think I might, I think of it a little bit differently, because I have this focus on kind of the positive feedbacks in social systems, and how that's when tipping points are most likely to occur, is when those positive feedbacks there. And so that often is through a process of exponential diffusion, right? So you get solar, then two friends of yours get solar, and then two friends of theirs get solar, right? And that's how that exponential process works, that brings you into that ever kind of speeding up of adoption of solar. And this happens for fads with any technology. And therefore, there are conditions you can undertake that help these decisions spread faster. And so, making information available, making these decisions more visible, making sure that there's learning opportunities. One thing they've found is that for certain energies, it takes a long time to technologies to come up a learning curve and get cheaper, because because they don't have, because they're done so infrequently. There's not a lot of opportunity, so so the US has built very few nuclear power plants, or whatever these unique technologies are. There's not the opportunity to really learn a lot from the process. And so making networks where countries that are doing things only once in a while can learn from each other, and kind of advance that learning curve, is another way that we can push some of these tipping points forward.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think you can't discount the example, right? When you see it happening somewhere, even if whether it's your neighbors or your neighboring country, it all feels much more possible. I remember going to Copenhagen the first time and seeing the at public transport, the place to store all the bikes, multi-story bike storage, and it changes your view of what's possible. And as well, I think Elena's point about, well, yours about the worst case scenario planning, it never hurts to look at that as you're preparing for this. And Elena's point about achievable shifts, that if we can focus a lot on what we really can do, and that what's possible and may make faster progress. I wanted to turn to the kind of next steps and where we go from here, knowing these risks and these opportunities. I'm curious, Elena, are there any countries that are approaching the challenges and opportunities of tipping points in a unique way, with lessons that could be applied to the US to help build institutions or a more productive framework for dealing with tipping points?
Well, so to be honest, there's no country that is on the Paris compatible pathway yet, and it's actually really sad. But at the same time, there are a lot of examples of communities that are really progressive, and that really now implement those concepts that we are talking about. So there are examples of communities of like 10, 50,000 inhabitants that are really able to get, I even remember, I think 300% of the electricity that they need themselves, through renewables like wind farms, solar panels, and so on. And it's not only energy production, but there are also for instance, in finance, there are also examples of financial investors initiatives that kind of go for green funding, and also for divesting of assets, and many more. So maybe one interesting example that I'm recently really kind of curious about, it's also Holland, the Netherlands, where you have an organization, Social Tipping Point Quality, and they try to push advertisement or bans on advertising fossil fuel products and companies. So I think and they managed actually to do this in Amsterdam. Yes, so in Amsterdam there's such a ban already functioning, and now they try to push it for the whole Holland. So it's a lot. And so there are many of such inspiring initiatives that show that, like, at the scale that they operate, that it's really possible, and they really kind of are able to implement those technologies and create networks, and gives some hope. But of course, the question is, how can we learn from such examples, and how can we scale them up, and so that they really spread all over, and we learn from all of them.
Thanks. Rachel, the risk management community focuses on reducing the risk posed by events where the timing and the location, the severity, or even if they're going to happen, is uncertain. What wouldn't we learn from that community, or from other historical examples of addressing risks like ozone or toxics or asbestos? Are there any lessons in that for this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I mean, often people see things like ozone and say, like, we were able to address this globally, and ask kind of why it's so much more difficult to address climate change than it was the hole in the ozone layer. But and there's many reasons for that. But one area we can think that we've thought about, kind of where risk management has focused on reducing risk, is around nuclear, the nuclear energy industry. And one thing they've thought about is thinking about how where they store waste, and the idea around, Ilona mentioned it earlier, around reversibility and irreversibility, right? And the idea that, so she was talking about how when these ecologies change states in a climate tipping point, there's an irreversibility to it. Although one scientist said to me at one point, like, well, it's reversible. It's just the timeline that we're talking about might be thousands of millions of years. It's the timeline isn't just like you can go back to a normal rainforest now, right? But around managing for nuclear waste, one of the things that's been thought a lot about is the storage of nuclear waste, and whether it should be put in the ground permanently and irreversibly, or whether it's something that actually should be allowed for each generation to kind of reverse that decision. And, this is the kind of thinking you want to be kind of, I think, putting into place around understanding the climate risks that we're either locking in and kind of making permanent, and those impacts that we're making permanent. That helps.
Okay. And we know that the climate science community has been interested in the idea of abrupt change and early detection systems for particular tipping points in the Earth system to be able to get a warning of when we're getting close to a tipping point. Are there analogs to that in the social science community that could lead to early detection for these kinds of social tipping points? Or does that rely on understanding and being able to model lots of systems and how they interact, better than we can actually do that now? Do either of you want to take that one?
I can start. There are some attempts to differentiate so-called system control parameters, for each candidate for social tipping element. For instance, like in the case of energy production, it would be or it could be the price of renewable energy compared to the price of fossil fuel-based energy. And some even say that actually we might have already crossed this tipping point there, that actually the prices of renewables are already lower in many world regions than the prices of fossil fuels, especially after or currently, like after, of course, the pandemic and then the war in Ukraine. At least in Europe, the prices of fossil fuels, they increased really rapidly. So now if you if you build a new house, you don't really think about like oil heating, no, gas heating, it's maybe some option, but it's very expensive. So almost like a natural choice now, it's a heat pump. And but there are also some barriers, like it's you have to wait for the heat pump, sometimes even a few months. And at least in Europe, there's also a problem with experts who can install the heat pumps, because not so many are trained yet. So in a way, no, maybe we have already crossed this tipping point there, but okay, there are those kind of social, like not all changes kind of go fast enough, but it goes faster every day, and you see just more and more of especially new houses that already have no heat pumps installed. So that means, and the same for other systems. You can also talk about try to differentiate, like what's the most important kind of control parameter there, and how to measure this. One other area, it's also like the norm changes. More and more people, well, maybe it's different in Europe than in the US, but at least in Europe, more and more people, especially young people, they start to feel really bad about using fossil fuels. Like if they need to like drive a car or even take an airplane, they kind of don't want to do it because they feel it's something what is morally wrong. So maybe like if you would measure like how people perceive fossil fuel, whether it's kind of neutral, positive, negative, do they kind of link it to some moral values? This could be another type of parameter to measure. So there are some attempts, but I think also a lot of research is needed there.
Great. I just wanted to remind you briefly in the audience, we're going to be getting to questions in just a few minutes. So please look at the Slido below the video and get your questions in so we can get to them very soon. Rachel, I wanted to ask you, if we were having this conversation 100 years ago and tried to speak to what might happen between, say, 1920 and today, we'd probably be wildly wrong because there've been so many rapid technological and social changes over that time. What can we learn from the existence of social and technological tipping points that could help expand our vision of what might be possible in the next 30 or 50 or 100 years, or even just in the climate and energy realm?
Yeah, thanks. And this goes to kind of the unpredictability, I think, of the social system to some extent, in that the biogeophysical system certainly has kind of surprise interactions and changes, but also has kind of natural laws governing it that, exist. Gravity is gravity all over the world, right? It's the same thing. And the social systems are very dynamic and varying, and therefore going actually to Ilona's, what she just answered before, the study that I had read that had looked at kind of early warning systems or signs of in social systems, when there had been a big social tipping point, they just kind of in the end said there wasn't a consistent signal that we found that actually predicted these things, right? Like you would want to see. And part of that is because of like your question to me of these rapid kind of social and technical changes that come about, and certainly the internet and the state of artificial intelligence and these kinds of things that have come about even in my lifetime, that nobody would have believed how we would communicate and have knowledge today that we have. It tells us, in a hopeful sense, it tells us that there could be something, that might be there in 30 or 50 years, that's incredibly good for the climate and good for human well-being, that we don't even have on our radar right now, or that is, in its very, very infancy. So in that sense, it's optimistic, but also that, yeah, it's very kind of a challenge to predict the kind of social and technological changes that might emerge from the changing world and the changing climate.
Right.
To add to this, Shirley, I think the difference between climate or natural systems and social systems is that the agents in the system, in the social systems, they actually do have the agency. Yeah. So so if you talk about changes in the climate system, so it's difficult to say that the water or I know some changes about biodiversity, that they have some intentions. Yeah. But if you talk about people, you can say yes, people have the agency, so they can in a way foresee the consequences of their actions, and they are reflexive. Yeah. So in a way, it gives us also some power, and powers us, yeah, because like we can actually make those changes happening. Yeah, but we need to prioritize environment, climate in our everyday decisions, and also important strategic decisions like in elections and maybe changes in the workplace and so on. But actually, we can influence those changes. So I think maybe a wrong step would be just to kind of sit and wait and until maybe some miracle technology appears on the horizon. But in a way, we have to like use whatever is possible and try to change our lifestyles, our organizations, institutions, and really and kind of the more people do it, the more it's possible. It's likely that we will tip the whole system at the end.
Thanks, Ilona. We've got a big list of questions from the audience here, and I would love to move over and start getting through some of those. I wanted to just start with 3 clarifying questions that the audience has put. They're interested if you could clarify the difference between a positive feedback loop and a tipping point. And does your definition of a climate tipping point imply the irreversibility? And how do we know when tipping points are irreversible? Which of you would like to take that? Is that one for you, Ilona?
Well, I can try. But the question is about the tipping points in climate systems, if I understand That's right. So a positive feedback loop. So kind of so maybe good examples actually those alpine glaciers that I was talking about at the beginning. Yes. So okay, if there's like a lot of ice and there the cover is white, so there's a lot of ice and snow, then they kind of reflect more sun, so they heat less. Yeah. But if it's getting warm, they are melting, so they are kind of turning kind of gray, and maybe like more and more stones are visible, and you know, and shows that the ice is disappearing, so they are getting dark. And in a way, instead of reflecting the sun, they actually absorb more sun, and they heat them even more. Yes, so that's an example of this as positive feedback, that, you know, the more dark they get, the more they heat and the more they disappear. And then this question of irreversibility. We of course know we have science behind. So we know that okay, it took thousands of years for those glaciers to be there, and to, you know, for the ice to accumulate and so on. And you just cannot kind of turn this process back within our human lifetime horizon. You know that probably like after thousands, maybe 100,000 years or so, maybe like there will be the vegetation will absorb the carbon from the atmosphere, and maybe, you know, be kind of the stable climate might be, or kind of, you know, colder climate might be recreated again. But it's like we are talking about 100,000 years or so. So it's not, you know, it's a time horizon that is not relevant for our human kind of decision-making time or even lifetime horizon. So that's this question of irreversibility. In the long time, those processes might be irreversible, but it's beyond the time horizon that is relevant to us.
Okay, thanks, Elena. One of the other questions we have says, in the US, some of the financial incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act may be pushing society to a tipping point on solar or electric vehicles. What are some of the other strategies that could push faster and further? Would you like to take that one, Rachel?
Yeah, so, you know, when we think about kind of getting these tipping points to happen in the policies, there's kind of, I mentioned kind of diffusion and kind of policies that encourage diffusion and kind of move, you know, and so, like I said, information is one. And so one thing that's been being done is, for example, buildings have, in some places, buildings, when they're being sold, or homes when they're being sold, right, have to include the energy use information, right? And this gives people the information they can use about really their carbon emissions, you know, from the energy use. So there's kind of like that diffusion, and then there's kind of like decisions that all of us would make if the conditions were right? Like if, you know, that you don't need to diffuse anything or change people's norms or values or what they think. You just need to put in the conditions where, of course, I would buy an electric vehicle if it were affordable. But beyond that, right, even if an electric vehicle were affordable to me, and I think the Inflation Reduction Act and policymakers know some of this, I need the infrastructure to be able to use that vehicle. So I don't have a driveway, right? And I don't have anywhere where I would be able to charge that car. And so building out the infrastructure, the enabling conditions that allow people to make these decisions that they already want to make, right? And so there's kind of those policies, and then there's the kinds of policies I think that kind of also encourage diffusion, and both those kinds of policies are needed.
Okay. I'm curious, Elena, has there been any systematic work to estimate and rank tipping points in terms of their likelihood and the strength of impact? That's a question we're getting from the audience.
In terms of climate tipping points?
I think maybe let's focus on social tipping points potentially.
Yes, well, it's still regarding social tipping points. It's still an emerging field. So there is a lot of research done by colleagues in this field. So I think we probably need to get there soon. But as I said, I think maybe in the energy production and storage system, we have already tipped this, or we have reached the tipping point, because like there you can look at the prices and compare the prices of renewables with the prices of fossil fuel technologies, and as I said, those prices are already lower for renewables. But also in other areas, like if you think about the divestment movement, like more and more, for instance, universities and pension funds, they commit to divestment, even countries, so it's, I think, also an emerging field. Maybe also education system is an interesting area, like a lot is happening there. And maybe so this kind of generational change, that young people now, I mean, most of them, they think completely differently. And I think also shows that the results of climate education and environmental education at schools. So maybe to sum up, it's something what we definitely should look like. And I think the most likely are probably those changes in the energy production, storage system, financial systems, and probably also kind of this generational change when we have that kind of more younger people at the job market, and also at leadership positions in politics, in business. Probably this will be also like a very fast change there.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. Rachel, we have a question saying that it's been my experience that domestic political tipping points, at least in the US system, typically lag well behind social tipping points on any topic. Does your research explore this aspect of sociological tipping points on actions to address climate change and its impacts? Another person, or possibly the same one, says, it seems to me that the social tipping points have been inhibited by the narrative that we have the solutions and the only thing missing is the political will. And so the role of personal agency has been undervalued and minimized, which leads to public passivity. Do you agree with that? What do you think about that problem?
Okay. I think so thinking about, I wasn't clear on domestic versus social tipping points. I wasn't sure if it was governmental versus individual. But there's a lot of discussion about the role of individuals in being able to push tipping points versus kind of top-down changes being needed to be made. And I really think the way I think about tipping points is that it can come from either direction, right? So those top-down changes, that governmental action that you want to see, well, individuals have a role in that as well, right? Like we as individuals can act collectively and exercise political powers and voting and things like that to get change at that governmental level. But at that governmental level, those are the people and the policies that can change the conditions, right? That are able to put in a carbon tax that then makes a lot of decisions easier to make, and that, or, can pass laws around what has to be on the market for electric vehicles or things like that. And then there's kind of the role of individual choice where I can make choices around one that we talk about a lot is dietary choices, or avoiding the most carbon impactful foods like beef or something like that, right? Or eating less beef. And you can make those individual choices, and the thing is, if diffusion occurs, if I'm making those choices and other people are seeing me make those choices, and more people are undertaking those individual choices, it can build to aggregate, right, change, where then also that does things like signals the market, right? People aren't eating this anymore, they're eating that. Or, people aren't buying these kinds of cars, they're buying electric vehicles. And then you get it, right? Then you get those producers changing. And so I think there's a good case to be made that you need both, but also that it can come from either side. There's a lot of discussion about critique coming from both ways, either feeling like people have been not engaged and their agency taken away, but also critique that, industry has pushed it down to the individual and made it their responsibility to clean up this mess, when actually, industry has profited from this pollution greatly and are the ones that have a lot of power in this system. And so there's a lot of discussion kind of about which, how agency has been influenced. But I think just from an analytical perspective, change can happen from either direction.
Maybe just to add shortly, about the also inequalities, because if you have like a few powerful actors who are blocking the changes, then of course it's an important problem. I think looking at inequalities, it's extremely important, and who kind of benefits from what kind of solutions. But this is evidence of minorities, kind of small groups that are able to increase their agency and push for some legal regulational solutions, or setting some technology standards. Yes, so it's definitely interesting. And just maybe like a small comment, it's really about electric vehicles. Yet they are needed, of course. But I think we have to go even farther. Probably we need more also like railway connections. Because if I think replacing all cars by electric vehicles, it's I don't know, maybe not even possible because of the lack of all the materials that are needed to produce batteries and so on. But of course, no, it is some solution. But I think we have to even go farther. So for instance, in Europe, there's an expansion of train networks and night trains, so that you don't need to fly, you can take a night train.
Thanks very much. Rachel, I'm curious, one of the questions here, it's a good one. It's what's going to inspire us to opt for innovative and creative solutions to unprecedented climate risk? What factors actually impart confidence at the community level to do this? Do you see anything out there?
Well, I think we've, certainly talked about communities coming together. I'm thinking about the kind of climate communication work that's going on, that's focusing on how we can bridge divides, right? And so I hope that kind of by starting to identify what communities collectively value and want to protect, and building from there. And I think in creative ways, and Ilona just kind of hit on that, right? Like I focus on like electric versus combustion vehicle, but there's a whole world of public transportation and walking and biking and things. And so that inspiring communities to kind of have a vision of what they value and what they want to protect and what they see as a better quality of life that they can move towards while reducing their impacts on the climate and adapting to our new climate, I think is that the kind of putting examples out there of different ways of organizing our communities that can bring people. It's not just about giving up something, right? And that it's about gaining quality of life and things like that. And I think that's kind of how I think about it. And there are processes out there, communities kind of going through these processes with, in our case in New Jersey, with researchers and adaptation. But I think others probably around the world that Ilona might know about.
Ilona, one of the questions we had is what can research funders do to facilitate understanding of social tipping points? And how can universities and other scientific institutions be a part of this? Do you have any advice on that?
Well, so I think just funding this research is already very helpful. So just 2 weeks ago, like a large proposal that we wrote about using Austria as a case study for showing how to get to climate neutrality. And we also wanted to look at those social tipping points and how they interact with tipping points in the climate system. And this proposal was unfortunately rejected. And for instance, proposals in medicine or even one in history, and also one kind of promise of like technology efficiency solutions and so on were funded, and our was in the really very last stage was rejected. Yes, so you see that that just the priorities are somewhere else, and like many decision makers, even including those committees in such funding agencies, they tend to think about kind of their own discipline and how can I help my colleagues, or how can I push my own field further, but they don't kind of have this bigger picture. Yeah, actually, what are the challenges and what needs to be done, and what are those big risks, so I think just because there's like a lot of research currently emerging in those fields, and we all struggle with funding problems. Yeah, that it's still not so easy to get funding for this kind of research, because other themes are prioritized. Yeah, because often like the reviewers are just not familiar with those concepts, or often there are also kind of older retired professors. Yeah, who just, I don't know, maybe they have just no interest in it's kind of beyond their time horizons maybe, so they don't appreciate or value this research. So definitely like more funding would be very helpful.
We have another question here about your opinions on whether a fundamental shift away from capitalism as a global financial system is necessary to try to avoid these tipping points or drive better ones, because it's a driver of both climate change and inequalities. And they're also asking, are there local small-scale initiatives that move away from capitalistic models? Are they likely to be more effective social tipping points? Would either of you like to take that one?
I can start, and then maybe Rachel can. So, well, the question is what is capitalism? And in a way, I think that the problem with well, actually it is, but the problem with it is also like the way how it functions. So what is happening? It's actually like you have like a narrow group of beneficiaries of the capitalist system who privatize the profits, but when it comes to damage, it's then becoming public. So in a way, we all have to pay for the damage. Yeah, and I think that's the basic problem. Yeah, how to internalize those externalities, and what kind of system can help us to to prevent this rent seeking and allowing those damaging activities. And some say that kind of like systems that are more local, where you can see what is how things are produced, and what kind of materials you use, that they are kind of like more accountable. And in a way, there's also like a lot of discussion about circular economic system, yeah, that you don't waste so much, that you kind of reuse, recycle. And in general, like if you think about, okay, we have, those great technologies, and there will be probably even more of technology breakthroughs, but we still, it's like one of the lessons is that we still need to reduce our energy use, yeah. So some say we need actually those kind of like the growth concepts, yeah, how to actually what kind of solutions are there that allow us to maintain our well-being, but kind of reduce the energy and material use in human societies. And capitalism is it's about kind of expanding and using more and being ineffective and producing a lot of waste that no one wants to take care of. Yeah. So that's, I think, the problem. But maybe Rachel, you want to add to this?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I'm teaching environmental solutions right now, and I was saying to my students, so they have a theory class with me last semester. I said, and we teach a lot of theory of what drives environmental problems. They hear a lot about capitalism. They hear a lot about how it creates inequality. And then they get to my solutions class, and we're talking about price signals, but everything's within capitalism. So this semester, we've been exploring ideas of, folks that are out there talking about steady state economies, talking about solidarity economies, and things. There are certainly kind of more localized forms that are taking root, and you can think about any kind of worker cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, electric cooperatives, right? For our particular solar co-ops, for our renewable energy interests, right? And but just other things like time banks and things where people are trading hours of time of labor rather than on the value of their labor in the market, right? And the way I was, thinking about it with my students, we talk about these things in changing, and the idea that like capitalism is going to be overthrown or something is just kind of difficult to think about, but in building these institutions that can serve as models of alternatives at the local level, and as you build those and you diffuse those, and they become more and more, you have an alternative there for when the next crisis comes, really, right? Or the next kind of problematic opening with capitalism. And so I think people, there's a lot of people kind of working on thinking about those kinds of alternatives that I think, and thinking about them as part of the solution to the climate problem.
Thanks, Rachel. There's another question here that's interesting about how there are some technologies that could help us reach social and technical tipping points, like the batteries and so on, but they have trade-offs, for instance, like the rush to be mining many more minerals to produce those, including in, natural environments that then suffer the consequences of that. How do you balance these trade-offs? And how much are these kind of things barriers to reaching the climate action tipping points we want to reach?
Should I start? Yes, so of course, yeah, and I think that's what we just talked about, that it's not just about replacing combustion engine cars with electric cars and you'll be all good, because exactly there are those limits, yeah. So I think a lot of discussion should be about reducing the energy and material use, and those solutions that we also talked about, yeah. So how to change like mobility within a city, yeah, and why do you need a car all the time? And actually, if you use a bike, if you use kind of active commuting, that you walk more, maybe for some parts of your route, you take a bus or a tram, and then you maybe bike or walk. Then actually it's good for you. It's good for your health. Yes, so it's not that you and maybe also you meet some friends on the way and you can have a nice chat. So and then you are outside. So it's actually not bad. In a way, exactly. So I think it's technology is important, but I think we also need to think about solutions that actually reduce the energy and material needs, because we have to still remember about all the people who are actually currently still suffering hunger or living in poverty. And I think the question is also, what kind of solutions are there to lift them up? Yeah, and I think it's unrealistic that you can bring everyone to the level of resource and energy use that we have in the global north.
Thank you. Rachel, here's an interesting question. What indicators are available to tell us if we're approaching a tipping point for societal breakdown due to misinformation and distrust? Do you think about that at all in your work, or what that kind of obstacle could mean in trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve?
I mean, we certainly think about this loss of trust, and particularly in institutions. Although on some of these other kinds of economies, and particularly the kind of collaborative economies and sharing economies, these require, and sharing economies is one route to kind of dematerializing. You have one that you're sharing amongst a group of people and that entails a certain level of trust. And there's folks doing work on that talk about that some of that trust is in place over kinds of the technologies that we have, right? And that folks do things like ride shares and other things because of social trust that's kind of facilitated by technology. But overall, as far as kind of having warning signs that we're approaching, societal breakdown, that's a really difficult question, because I think at many points, many of us look around and feel like, things are, kind of getting worse as far as trust across people, or even just being able to talk across different groups of people. But I wouldn't know what point you would say that that's going to approach some bad social tipping point or something like that. And I haven't thought much about it. I don't know if Ilona has.
And maybe one indicator in my research group we are trying to understand, it's polarization in the society, but also in social media. And it's interestingly, it's not that it's spontaneous yet, because there are algorithms that social media use that actually support polarization. Yeah, because like you get more similar content because it's more beneficial for the social media operators, and then you end up in those kind of bubbles, where and people don't, as Rachel said, people don't talk across those bubbles. You stay like within your own bubble, yeah? And then and sometimes it's also misused by some interest groups, yeah, and they actually we observed it during the corona pandemic, but also now during the war in Ukraine, that actually there's a lot of misinformation and misuse, and it's and there are some interest groups behind that kind of drive this polarization and try to antagonize different groups against each other. But again, as Rachel said, I think it's very difficult to say about prediction. Yeah, I think you cannot really predict how people will behave. So you can talk about likelihood of different events. Yeah, but I think polarization shows that that kind of there's more kind of tension and maybe even aggression and negative kind of emotions. So it's not good, of course.
We have so many good questions here, but I think we're running to the end of our time for them. Sadly, I wish I could ask you some of the ones about everything from AI to to other things in here. But instead, I just want to ask you both a final question, which is, what is the one thing you'd like the audience to take away from this conversation today? Can I start with Rachel?
Sure. Yeah, I think the point that I would like the audience to take away is that the idea that actually, it's funny that one of the questions brought it out, that social tipping points can kind of come from the bottom up or from the top down, right? And that kind of rapid social change can happen through individuals taking action and building that community and diffusing that action out, and that can I think really tip certain things, and that also folks from the top down can, obviously we should be pressuring the leaders to make changes.
Thanks. And Ilona,
Yes.
what's the one thing you'd like the audience to take away from today's conversation?
Actually, something similar. I think that you or we can make a change. Yeah, you have the agency, and you can influence. This is what is happening in the world. And it's not only about the kind of everyday agency that we have as consumers, but the agency that we have as citizens, yeah, that we can push those changes in the infrastructure that are needed. We can push the policies that are needed. But yeah, we have to become active. It will not happen on its own when we just kind of passively observe. So I think the most important message, I think, we have the agency in our hands. We have to use it, and we all have to become more active and more involved and engaged.
That's it's a great message from both of you that we actually can do something about this rather than sit back and be passive observers of what's happening. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much to both of you and to the audience. This has been so interesting and with some really, really great questions. I appreciate all of your time today and for listening. And let me pass back to Alex now.
Thanks, Laurie, and thank you for your wonderful moderation, and agree. What a fantastic, positive, affirming note to end on, Rachel and Lona. Thank you for sharing from your work. For everyone who joined us for our conversation this month, thank you. I'm really pleased we were able to get to as many of the questions as we did, and there were a lot of really good ones we didn't get to as well. The conversation was recorded, and you can view it on this same webpage immediately. Please, again, register for our climate newsletter to get updates on all of our climate work. And please join us for our next climate conversation on April 27th, which is about how to work better with nature to support human well-being and ecosystems and build resilience to some of the stressors we've been talking about today. As a final reminder to share your feedback on our event today or ideas for future events, please see the survey link. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes who supported our event today. And thank you to all of you for joining. Stay safe and have a good one.